last one or the first?
The first and the three sub-questions.
Oh my goodness.
Inspired.
No guarantees in life, right?
And I also want to kind of do some remarks that are a bit symmetric to the way Melanie opened, and try to glean from what we've discussed, what can be somewhat added, what is it we've learned from this seminar. And I want to also, since I'm the first speaker, speak a little bit about the future so that other speakers could kind of react to that. You know, at the same time, I'm dividing the work with my partner, Adil, so I won't go in detail on some of the discoveries here. I'll kind of synthesize them, and he will go more in detail on some of kind of the crucial elements that came out. So let me speak about first kind of what is the emerging, from the pieces of the puzzle that emerged, does it help us kind of find a way to think about state-business relation, kind of a model, if you like. And second, a set of ideas about what potentially makes the specificity of the region relative to other regions in terms of the political economy of state-business relations and therefore of economic performance, before concluding with some ideas for future research that we would discuss. Okay, first in terms of the emerging model, it seems to me it's good to actually come back to an old kind of classical model of state-business relation, which is kind of the general description of political settlement by Douglas North, which classifies the world into limited order arrangements on the one hand, where deals versus rules rule, if you like, and an idealized open order deal, if you open order arrangement, where there is an agreement among political forces and society enshrined in a set of institutions that define rules, so that everybody plays actually by the rules of the game, and there is true competition politically and economically, an ideal. Much of the world is of a limited order arrangement, and Ahmed would even argue, or rather Mustafa, that even the United States has a limited arrangement today. It's possible. It's probably the most interesting kind of...
Melanie agrees with us, by the way.
Does she? Okay, we don't have Trump supporters here. Okay, all right. Now, then North has a very interesting and minimalist description of what is a limited order equilibrium. It's basically, you know, it says this is a society with lots of people, groups form of various sorts, you know, leaders of groups emerge, and then there is some coalition of heads of groups that manages to reduce violence in this society, manages to take over as a coalition and kind of get the monopoly of power. And that's your ruling group, your ruling elite, your ruling coalition. That's on the political side. But for this equilibrium to hold, this political coalition needs to raise rents in order to glue itself together and to ensure also, formally or informally, this role about security. And not only does it want to restrict organizations to create these rents, monopoly rents if you like, but also it wants to exclude organization in order not to get other groups to want to join the coalition, to benefit from the economy and want to join the coalition. So basically, economically, this coalition will restrict. And will restrict, North says, for two reasons. To create rents, to generate rents that can be shared within the coalition to keep it together, and to prevent others from becoming powerful and threatening so much that they want to enter the coalition. And then you see this equilibrium he describes is kind of a trade-off between politics and economics, because a broad coalition would preserve peace more easily, but would require a lot of rents, and therefore would have to tax the economy too much, and the situation would not be sustainable. On the other hand, if it's too small, it needs less rents, the economy would do well, but other groups would threaten to emerge and take over because it's too narrow. And so this is a very rich description, and I saw it in many of what we've talked about, in the sense that we've been looking at this relationship between power and money, and seeing how power distorts markets in order to actually achieve rent creation. These privileged firms that make money and can play clientelistic roles in Lebanon, or finance elections by winning contracts in Turkey through state procurement. So rent creation, but also exclusion. We saw cases that resemble exclusion, where we don't see pious bourgeoisie emerging in Egypt because the rule of law is set in a certain way, or we don't see opposition groups emerging in Tunisia. And so in that contract that we've been talking about between clients and patrons, privileged firms and their leaders, we focus much more on the economics, but you could see that they are delivering services to their patron, and these services are either rents, profits that they are making, which they're spending on behalf, or partly, they're becoming rich, but also spending on behalf of their patron, clientelistic, electoral finance, and things like that. Or they are playing the role of occupying the heights of the economy and not allowing opposition groups to do that. And I think these two, I haven't seen these two themes emerge that clearly outside of Norse before this conference. And I think it could be a guiding principle for us to think of these as different. As
3 more minutes.
Yeah, I'm going a bit slow because I thought that's important. Now, whether that relationship between state and business goes more towards rent creation or to exclusion is important in terms of economic performance, because if you want to generate rents, you would tend to go to the rent-thick sectors, construction, energy, and the like. On the other hand, if you want to exclude, the patron would want to send the clients towards growth sectors. This is where the opposition can enter and make money. And growth sectors would often be in export, and so the growth costs could be higher. Turkey provides a very nice example where the first period seems to be one much more focused on rents, and after the coup, much more focused on exclusion, so one could expect the economy to deteriorate. I would hypothesize, but future research would look into it, that competitive systems, competitive political systems, would focus much more on the rent creation element, because competitive system, by definition, you have two groups opposing each other. And so to try to erase the other group is very difficult or impossible given that particular political settlement, because this is what a competitive system is. Doesn't come from the heart, is when there are two systems that cannot annihilate each other, so they have to live together. Now, on the bigger question that is often asked about us, about how these systems evolved, I want to remind you that they don't evolve just between state and businesses. There is also society as a very important player, and so how societies evolve and how autocrats or governments deal with society, social services, issues of inequality also matter, how the middle class emerges, puts pressure for rule of law and for services, or it doesn't. Moral movements that have emerged in our region and in other regions, in India, in other places, are a novelty that has to do with more communication and are affecting the way the systems work. So let's be careful when we jump to how the system evolves and the dynamics of these past, because it also depends on social analysis, which we haven't at all focused on here. And of course, the way the world is evolving is very important. In all that we've talked about, it's a second phase of capitalism after 20 years after liberalization, in a world with less trading opportunities than before, with technological change that favors the concentration of money, and so this is also influencing things. And actually this kind of mingling of money and power that we're talking about is a global phenomena as well. So let's keep this in historical context. These are a few quick thoughts now on kind of the emerging framework. In terms of MENA, the Middle East specificity in that framework, I think in our discussion it became clear that there's no one thing. I mean, this is not the most corrupt regions in the world, and this is not the slowest growth region in the world. It's actually somewhere in the middle. There are regions that are more corrupt and growing corrupt in the sense of connected, and growing faster, and this is Asia, where the patron has been able to give privileges but get performance against them very often. There are other regions that are more corrupt with less performance. Latin America, Africa could be there. So we're somewhere in the middle. Probably an important characterization of the region is that it had, under duress, to open up economically in the 80s, but they had the luxury of not opening up politically, largely because of external support, I would suppose, for autocrats, for various geostrategic interests that the region represent. Now, other regions have been autocratic, so it's not just that, but that's an important reason. Add to this kind of a recurrent Dutch disease that makes it very hard to participate in the growing global market. Add to this that the region started later than Asia, and so missed, if you like, the big growth in external opportunities. And add to it, as a characterization, that the region didn't have an elevator, didn't have a Japan, basically, that with the flying geese coming down the region. Europe was the hope, but then Europe got busy with Eastern Europe at the right time. And so the region didn't have an elevator and has, frankly, lousy trade deals with Europe and didn't develop kind of positive externalities type relation with the Gulf either. People move to the Gulf as opposed to Gulf capital moving to where the people are. And so I think these 4 or 5 elements can characterize the region and perhaps give rise to what we could focus on in the future, which is what is Arab capitalism in a way, and what kind of characterizes it. And one of the paper that was not presented here tries to do that by Stefan Hertog. I encourage you to read it. He focuses a lot on the dualism in the labor market and in the corporate market, between big firms and informal market, between elite labor and informal labor, and so that neither labor nor capital come easily into a class that can represent class interest and make a deal with the state. And so it all is about personal relationship of elite groups with the state. And as a result, there's very little dynamism for change besides explosions and revolutions. We may end up with something like that. Okay, finally, a few words on what I think would be good ideas for the future. I think this group should stay and should get broader. I hope we can put together a proposal quickly and go for a second phase. In that second phase, a priori, I would propose 4 things, and look forward to listen from you about other things. The first, I would say, is to simply look at more countries from whichever point of view the researchers want to look at, preferably with quantitative methods. I mean, we should be looking at Jordan, Algeria, Palestine, Yemen, Sudan, Syria. Second, put more emphasis on the Gulf, on that idea that has emerged of a private sector owned by the public sector and the complexity of kind of state capitalism as it's emerging in Iran and in the Gulf, where you have many players and you could have actually some separation between ownership and control. A system that potentially works better than state-owned enterprises, but doesn't work like an idealized private market, and start characterizing this much more. The third idea would be to give a bit more space for theory. Let's build on initial kind of discoveries to theorize more along the lines I described or some other lines. And I think in that perspective, bringing with us political scientist. Melanie tells me at the end of every political science meeting, they say it's all the economy, and we always, as we end up saying it's the polity, so it'd be good to bring more political scientists to work with us, and sociologists. I mean, thank you for Muhammad to represent the sociologist among us. Sorry? And Kevan, of course. Kevan. And
have
finally,
taken a lot more than you should.
finally,
So please.
last point, sorry for taking too long, is to start working on the political economy of the informal sector and of SMEs, which is a big part of our economies that remain very mysterious from a political economy perspective. Here.